Everything started with a highway, a stretch of road I've traveled 1,000 times, but this one night, it felt like the asphalt was stretching forever, leading me somewhere I shouldn't be going. I've been a trucker for 15 years, driving through every state, from California deserts to Maine's frozen roads. I've seen some stuff, heard stories. But nothing prepared me for what I saw that night. It was a long-haul run. Just me, my rig, and the empty stretch of highway cutting through the Midwest. You know how it is. The only thing keeping you company at 2 a.m. is the faint radio static, and maybe the occasional distant flicker of headlights in the rearview. But this night, there was nothing. No headlights. No static. It was like the world had swallowed me whole. I had left a gas station a few hours before. The guy at the counter warned me, said there'd been weird stuff happening on the road lately. Of course, I shrugged it off. Truckers hear all kinds of BS from station attendants trying to scare you. Ghost hitchhikers, missing cars, haunted rest stops. I'd heard it all. But as I was driving through a narrow valley surrounded by dense trees, the road started to change. First, the radio went dead. Total silence. Then my phone's GPS glitched. The screen flickered like it was trying to pick up a signal but couldn't. No big deal, right? Happens in remote areas all the time. But then I noticed something else. There were no other cars. 4 miles. At this time of night, even in the middle of nowhere, you'd at least expect a fellow trucker or a lone sedan speeding by. But it was like I was the only soul left on Earth. I passed a sign. It should have said Silver Creek Rest Area, 5 miles, but the words were smeared, like someone had run their hand through wet paint. My headlights barely illuminated it, but I remember clear as day how wrong it looked. 5 minutes later, I saw a figure on the side of the road. Hitchhikers at night aren't uncommon, but this guy, he was different. He wasn't waving for a ride. Just standing there. Watching. And there was something about the way he stood, too still, like a statue. My instinct screamed to keep driving, so I did. But as I passed him, I felt an icy chill run through me, and I glanced in the mirror. He was gone. Vanished. Not a trace. I started feeling uneasy, like something was following me. I turned off the radio completely. Didn't want to hear the silence, didn't want to hear whatever was lurking in it either. The road ahead seemed darker now, the trees closing in tighter around me. I shifted in my seat, trying to shake off the creeping dread crawling up my spine. That's when I noticed the lights in the distance. Up ahead, just beyond a bend in the road, there was a soft, pulsing glow. It wasn't the harsh brightness of car headlights, more like the eerie, flickering glow of an old street lamp. But there were no lampposts out here, no civilization for miles. As I got closer, I saw what it was. A gas station. But not the kind you'd expect in the middle of nowhere. This one looked old, like it had been frozen in time. The pumps were the ancient kind, the ones with the spinning numbers. The sign above it was in some language I couldn't recognize. My truck slowed to a crawl as I approached, against my better judgment. My hands were slick on the wheel, cold sweat dripping down my back. But for some reason, I couldn't stop myself from pulling in. There was a single light on above the station door, and behind the glass, I could see someone sitting at the counter. They weren't moving, just staring straight ahead. It was too far to make out any details, but something about the figure sitting in that dim light made my skin crawl. I kept my engine running, every nerve in my body screaming at me to get the hell out of there. But then I heard it. A knock. On the back of my trailer. My heart dropped into my stomach. I slammed the lock on my door, gripping the wheel tight enough for my knuckles to turn white. My eyes darted to the side mirror, expecting to see someone, or something, standing behind me. But there was nothing. Only the faint rustling of trees and the low hum of my engine. And then the knock came again. Louder. More insistent. This time from the passenger side window. I whipped my head around, and there it was. The hitchhiker. His face pressed up against the glass, his eyes wide and empty, like black pits staring straight into me. His mouth was open, but no sound came out, just the horrifying silence. I slammed the gas pedal, the truck roared forward, tires screeching as I pulled out of that cursed station and back onto the road. But the figure. It didn't disappear this time. It was running alongside my truck. Keeping pace. Those dead eyes locked on me. I floored it, going faster than I ever had, my heart pounding out of my chest. I didn't care if I flipped the rig, I just needed to get away. But no matter how fast I went, the figure stayed right there, outside my window, its mouth still gaping in that terrible silent scream. Then, suddenly, it was gone. I didn't stop. Not for hours. I didn't even know where I was driving anymore. Just far, far away from whatever the hell that thing was. Eventually, I reached a small town, pulled into a diner parking lot, and stumbled out of the truck. My legs were shaking so bad I could barely stand. I must have looked like a lunatic, but I didn't care. I needed to see people, hear voices, anything to prove that I was still in the real world. I never went back on that route again. I don't know what I saw that night, or what it wanted. But I know one thing for sure, I'm never driving alone on that stretch of road after dark again. And neither should you. I sat in that diner for what felt like hours, staring at the cup of coffee I hadn't touched. The place was empty, save for a couple of truckers at the counter who didn't give me a second glance. I didn't say a word to the waitress either, even when she asked if I was alright. How could I explain it? That I had seen something impossible, something that shouldn't exist? Eventually, my hands stopped shaking, but the feeling in my gut, this heavy gnawing dread, stayed with me. I knew I couldn't stay there forever, so I got back in my truck. The idea of sleeping in the cab made my skin crawl, but I didn't have a choice. I locked the doors, checked the mirrors about 50 times, and finally let my eyes close. That's when the dreams started. At first, it was just flashes of the hitchhiker's face, those dead empty eyes staring at me through the window. But then it got worse. I was back on the road, my truck moving on its own. The trees were closing in, tighter and tighter, the branches scraping the sides of my rig like claws. In the distance, I could see the gas station again, its eerie light flickering like a dying star. And standing at the pumps was the figure, waiting for me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart hammering against my ribs. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting an orange glow over the parking lot. For a brief moment, I felt safe. Daylight has a way of chasing away the dark, you know? But that sense of safety didn't last long. Because when I looked in the side mirror, I saw something that nearly stopped my heart. Mia. On the passenger side window. Right where the hitchhiker's face had been the night before. I froze, every muscle in my body tensing. I hadn't imagined it. That thing, whatever it was, had been real. And it had left its mark. I didn't know what to do. I couldn't call the cops. What would I even tell them? That some ghost or demon had chased me down the highway. I'd end up in a psych ward for sure. So I did the only thing I could think of, I started driving again. I didn't care where, just away. As far away from that stretch of road as I could get. For a while, things seemed to go back to normal. I took different routes, stayed off the back roads as much as possible, and tried to forget about that night. But no matter how far I drove, no matter how many miles I put between myself and that cursed highway, something was following me. It started small. A flash in the rearview mirror. A shadow darting across the road just beyond the reach of my headlights. At first, I thought it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the lingering trauma from what had happened. But then, one night, I saw it again. I was hauling a load through Texas, heading south on a desolate stretch of road. The sky was clear, no sign of rain, and the stars were bright overhead. Everything was fine, until I caught movement in my side mirror. It was the same figure, running alongside my truck. My blood turned to ice. I slammed on the brakes, the tires screeching as the rig came to a halt. But when I looked out the window, there was nothing there. No one. My hands were shaking again, just like they had in the diner. I knew I had to get off the road, find somewhere to stop. But every gas station I passed was dark, abandoned. The next town was miles away, and I didn't dare pull over on the side of the road, not after what happened the last time. Then I saw it. Up ahead, just off the highway. A motel. It wasn't much, a flickering neon sign, a few rooms, and a single car parked outside, but it was enough. I pulled in, parked the truck, and practically ran to the front desk. The clerk barely looked up as he handed me the key, his eyes glazed over like he'd seen one too many weary travelers pass through. The room smelled like mildew and the bed was stiff as a board, but I didn't care. I locked the door, pulled the curtains tight, and collapsed onto the mattress. Sleep came quickly, but so did the dreams. This time, I wasn't on the road. I was in the motel room, but I wasn't alone. I could feel someone, or something, standing at the foot of the bed, watching me. I tried to move, to scream, but my body wouldn't respond. All I could do was lie there, paralyzed, as the figure crept closer, its breath hot against my skin. Then, just as it reached out to touch me, I woke up. But the room wasn't empty. Standing in the corner, shrouded in shadow, was the hitchhiker. I couldn't breathe. My heart pounded so loudly I was sure it would explode. The figure didn't move, just stood there, watching me with those same lifeless eyes. I wanted to scream, to run, but my body wouldn't obey. It was like I was trapped in my own skin, helpless to do anything but watch. Then, slowly, it started to move toward me. Its footsteps were silent, but I could feel the weight of them, each one sending a shiver down my spine. Closer and closer it came, until it was standing right next to the bed. I could see its face now, pale, gaunt, with sunken cheeks and lips twisted into a grotesque smile. Its hand reached out, fingers long and bony, stretching toward my throat. And then, just as it was about to touch me, it whispered something. A single word. Run. I don't know how, but in that moment, I broke free from the paralysis. I shot out of bed, threw open the door, and sprinted for my truck. I didn't look back, didn't stop until I was inside, slamming the door behind me and locking it tight. My chest heaved, my heart racing, but I was alive. Somehow, I had escaped. I don't know what that thing was. A ghost? A demon? Something worse? All I know is that it's still out there. Waiting. Watching. And next time, I might not be so lucky. So if you're ever out on the highway late at night, and you see a figure on the side of the road, don't stop. Don't look. Just keep driving. Because once it sets its eyes on you, it doesn't let go. And you'll never see the road the same way again. I thought that once I'd made it out of that motel parking lot, once I hit the highway again, the nightmare was over. I couldn't have been more wrong. Because what came next wasn't just worse, it was something beyond explanation. I kept driving, faster than I ever had, with no clear direction, just away. Away from the motel, away from that thing. My hands were trembling on the wheel, and I was running on adrenaline and fear. The interstate was empty, and the darkness pressed in around me like a living thing. Every shadow on the road seemed to shift, every flicker of my headlights felt like it was hiding something waiting just beyond the edge of the light. About an hour in, my fuel gauge started to drop, faster than it should have. I cursed under my breath. I hadn't thought to stop for gas back at the motel, and now I was running low, dangerously low, with no sign of a station in sight. The highway stretched on, an endless ribbon of black. And then I saw it. The faint glow of a gas station in the distance, its lights flickering weakly in the night. Relief flooded through me, but it was tinged with something else, fear. It looked familiar. Too familiar. It was the same gas station. The one from that night. My foot instinctively lifted off the gas pedal, my heart pounding in my ears. There was no way. I had been driving for hours, and I'd taken different routes. There was no possible way I had ended up back here. But as I got closer, I saw the sign again, the same worn-out pumps, the same flickering light above the station door. The same figure behind the glass. I slammed on the brakes, my rig screeching to a halt just before the entrance. The engine rumbled, protesting, but I didn't care. I wasn't going in there. Not again. My mind raced. Maybe I could make it to the next town. Maybe there was another station, just a few miles up the road. But deep down, I knew the truth. This road wasn't going to let me leave. I put the truck in reverse, preparing to back out, but as soon as I did, the engine sputtered and died. My heart sank. I was out of gas. The headlights dimmed, the dashboard lights flickering before going out completely, leaving me in total darkness. The silence was deafening. I could feel the weight of it pressing down on me, like the night itself was alive and suffocating me. I sat there, frozen, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. And then I saw it. In the side mirror. The hitchhiker. Standing at the edge of the gas station lot, just behind the pumps, staring at me. His face was as pale as the moonlight, his eyes black voids that swallowed everything around them. His mouth was twisted into that same grotesque grin, a silent scream that sent a wave of terror crashing over me. I couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. It was like my body was paralyzed with fear, just like in the motel. He didn't move, didn't blink, just stood there watching me. Waiting. Then slowly, he lifted his hand and pointed. Not at me, but at the station. I don't know why I did it. Maybe it was instinct, or maybe it was because I knew there was no other option. But I got out of the truck. The air outside was cold, much colder than it should have been for a summer night in the Midwest. It stung my skin as I stepped toward the station, my boots crunching on the gravel. I didn't look back at the hitchhiker. I couldn't. If I did, I was sure I'd never move again. The door to the station creaked open as I approached, the light above it flickering more violently now, casting eerie shadows across the ground. Inside, the figure behind the counter still hadn't moved. As I crossed the threshold, I could see him more clearly. He wasn't just still, he was wrong. His skin was waxy, his eyes lifeless. It was like he wasn't real, just a mannequin dressed up to look like a person. But I knew better. I stepped up to the counter, my heart hammering in my chest. There was no point in asking for help, I knew I wouldn't get any. I reached into my pocket for my wallet, but the figure behind the counter finally moved. Slowly, its head turned toward me, those dead eyes locking onto mine. Its mouth opened, and a sound came out, a garbled wet noise, like it was trying to speak through a mouthful of water. Fill your tank. The voice was wrong, distorted, like it was coming from a broken speaker. But I didn't argue. I grabbed the nozzle and walked back to my truck, my legs feeling like lead. As I pumped the gas, I glanced around, scanning the empty lot. The hitchhiker was gone, vanished into the night. But that didn't make me feel any better. I knew he was still out there waiting. Watching. The tank filled quicker than it should have, like the pump was pushing the gas through too fast. I didn't care. As soon as it clicked, I threw the nozzle back into place, jumped into the cab, and turned the key. The engine roared to life, the headlights flickering back on. I floored it, tearing out of the station as fast as I could. The tires squealed on the pavement as I sped down the highway, my heart racing, every nerve in my body screaming at me to get away. But as the miles passed, the dread didn't fade. I kept glancing in the rearview, half expecting to see that figure standing in the road behind me, but the road was empty. The darkness seemed to stretch on forever, and I started to wonder if I was even going the right way. That's when I saw the lights again. But this time, they weren't from a gas station. Up ahead, the highway was bathed in red and blue flashing lights. I slowed down as I approached, my heart pounding in my ears. It was a police roadblock. Several cruisers were parked across the road, their lights spinning, casting eerie shadows across the asphalt. I could see a few officers standing by the cars, their faces hidden in the darkness. I pulled to a stop, my hands shaking as I rolled down the window. An officer approached, his face illuminated briefly by the flashing lights. He was tall, his features sharp, but there was something off about him. His eyes seemed too dark, too hollow. "Everything okay, driver?" he asked, his voice low and slow, like he was measuring each word. I nodded, my mouth too dry to speak. "Where you headed?" he asked, glancing at my truck, then back at me. There was a strange smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. I don't know," I finally managed to say. It was the truth. I had no idea where I was going anymore. The officer's smile widened, his eyes glinting in the dim light. "You might want to turn around," he said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "There's nothing good down that road." And with that, he stepped back, motioning for me to move on. I didn't argue. I rolled the window up, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and empty, but the officer's words echoed in my mind. "There's nothing good down that road." I didn't turn around. I just kept driving. And I still am. It's been weeks now. Or maybe months. Time's become a blur on the highway, the lines on the road melting into one endless haunting streak. I haven't seen another soul since that night at the roadblock. Not in person, not a single other driver out here in the dark. It's like the world's disappeared. The thing is, I know I should have turned around. Should have listened to that cop, or whatever he was. But something's been pulling me forward, like the road itself won't let me go. No matter how much I want to stop, how much I want to turn around, there's this invisible weight dragging me deeper into the night. At first, I tried to find my way back to civilization, to anywhere familiar, but no matter what direction I took, I kept ending up on the same highway. The landscape's all wrong. Twisted trees and unfamiliar signs with words that don't make sense, like they've been written in some ancient language no one's spoken for centuries. Sometimes I think I see shapes moving in the woods at the edge of the road, but when I look directly at them, they're gone. Like shadows that don't belong to anything. And then there's the silence. No birds, no crickets, no wind. Just the low hum of my engine, the creak of the tires on the pavement, and sometimes, when I stop for a moment, a faint whisper. It's never loud, just on the edge of hearing, like someone's trying to speak to me but can't quite form the words. I thought maybe I was going crazy, that the isolation was getting to me, but then something else happened. It was 2 nights ago. I had parked by the side of the road trying to get some sleep, though every time I closed my eyes, I'd see that hitchhiker's face or the gas station, or worse, the figure behind the counter. I'd barely drifted off when I heard it, a tapping sound on the side of the truck. Soft at first, but getting louder. Like fingernails scraping against the metal. I bolted upright, my heart racing, and listened. Top, top, top. It was coming from the passenger side, the same place where I'd seen the hitchhiker before. I didn't want to look. Every instinct told me to stay put, lock the doors, and wait it out. But I had to know. Slowly, I turned my head and looked out the window. There was nothing there. Just the empty road, stretching off into the blackness. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my pounding heart. Maybe it was just an animal, or my imagination playing tricks on me again. I settled back into the seat, but the feeling of unease wouldn't go away. Then, the tapping started again. This time, it was faster, more insistent, like someone was drumming their fingers against the metal. I gripped the wheel, knuckles white, staring straight ahead. The air in the cab felt thick, heavy, like something was pressing down on me. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the tapping stopped. But the silence that followed was worse. Because now I could hear breathing. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there, coming from right next to me. My skin crawled, every hair standing on end. I couldn't move, couldn't bring myself to turn and look. The air in the cab grew colder, like a winter chill had seeped in from the outside, freezing me in place. And then, just on the edge of my hearing, I heard it again.
A voice. Run.
It was the same word, the same voice that I'd heard in the motel. But this time, it wasn't a warning.
It was a command. I didn't need to be told twice.
My hand shot to the ignition, turning the key, the engine roaring to life. I floored it, tires screeching as I sped off into the night. The breathing faded, but that feeling, that presence, stayed with me, like it was still there, just out of sight, waiting for the right moment. I drove for hours, not caring where I was going, just needing to get away from whatever was out there. The road twisted and turned, and eventually, I saw something in the distance, a flicker of light, small but unmistakable.
Another gas station. But this one was different.
It didn't have that eerie, frozen look like the last one. The lights were steady, the pumps were modern, and there was a diner attached with neon signs flashing open 24 hours.
It looked normal.
For the first time in what felt like forever, I let out a sigh of relief. I pulled into the lot, my hands still shaking, and parked in front of the diner. The warmth from the lights spilled out onto the pavement, and I could see people inside, actual people, eating, drinking coffee, talking. I almost cried from the relief of it. I needed to be around others, needed to feel normal again. I stepped out of the truck, the cool air hitting my face, and made my way toward the diner. As I reached the door, I glanced back at my rig, just to make sure everything was all right. And that's when I saw it.
The hitchhiker.
Standing in the shadows, right by the back of my trailer, his eyes locked on me. He didn't move, didn't try to approach. He just stood there, watching, waiting. I froze. My hand hovered over the door handle, my mind screaming at me to get inside, to get away from him. But something held me back. Something in the way he was looking at me, like he was pleading. I don't know what came over me, but I took a step toward him.
Then another.
My heart was pounding, my palms slick with sweat, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what he wanted. As I got closer, I saw his face more clearly. It wasn't the twisted, grotesque grin from before.
He looked sad, desperate. And then, for the first time, he spoke.
"Help me," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the diner's neon lights. Before I could respond, he turned and walked into the darkness, disappearing behind the diner. I stood there, staring after him, my mind racing.
Help him? What did he mean? How could I help someone like him?
And why did I feel like I had no choice? I glanced back at the diner, the warmth of it so inviting, so normal. But something deep inside told me that if I went in, if I ignored him, I'd never find out the truth. I'd be stuck on this road forever, haunted by that face, that voice, that command to run.
So I followed him. Into the dark.
The moment I stepped into the shadows behind the diner, the warmth of the neon lights disappeared. It was like crossing an invisible boundary, leaving the world of the living behind and stepping into something else, something older and darker. The hitchhiker was nowhere in sight, but the air was thick, like the night was holding its breath, waiting. I hesitated for a second, wondering if I'd made a terrible mistake, but it was too late to turn back now. I could feel it deep in my gut. Whatever this was, whatever had been pulling me along all these miles, it was leading me here. The narrow alley behind the diner stretched out ahead of me, barely lit by a single flickering bulb. The dumpsters on either side loomed like dark shapes, and the smell of old grease and rotting trash filled the air. I took a few cautious steps forward, my heart hammering in my chest. Then I heard it.
Footsteps.
Soft, shuffling, coming from somewhere deeper in the alley. I froze, straining my ears to pinpoint the sound. It was moving toward me, slow and deliberate, like someone dragging their feet through the gravel. I wanted to run, every instinct screaming at me to get out of there, but I couldn't. Something was keeping me rooted in place, my legs locked up with fear. The footsteps got closer, and then I saw him. The hitchhiker stepped out of the shadows, his face still twisted in that same look of sorrow, his clothes hanging off him like rags. He was closer now than ever before, and in the dim light, I could see the details I hadn't noticed before. His skin was pale, almost translucent, and there were deep, dark bruises around his neck, like someone had tried to strangle him. His eyes, those empty black eyes, looked right through me. "Help me," he whispered again, his voice barely audible over the pounding in my ears. I opened my mouth to speak, but no words came out. What could I possibly say? How could I help him? But he didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and started walking again, disappearing deeper into the alley. And again, without thinking, I followed. The alley twisted and turned, narrowing until it felt like the walls were closing in on me. The flickering light from the diner faded behind me, and soon, I was walking in near total darkness. The only sound was the soft crunch of my boots on the gravel, and the distant, almost rhythmic tapping of the hitchhiker's footsteps ahead of me. After what felt like an eternity, the alley opened up into a small clearing, a forgotten part of the town, hidden behind the buildings where no one ever went. There was a single streetlight here, but it flickered weakly, casting long shadows across the ground. In the center of the clearing, there was something strange. A well. It looked ancient, like it had been there for centuries.